Still call the order. Everything. Okay, so we'll call the order at 5:59 p.m. We'd like to begin this meeting by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional and ancestral and unceded territories of the Inuit and the Seal people. Adoption of minutes. So the recommendation is that the minutes of the recreational advisory.
Yeah, we can do that.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so just right on to new business then. Okay, so financial reports of Mr. Zackel and Mr. Kevin to present.
Oh, it's okay with you guys?
Yep.
First off, just so people know, because we don't have quorum, this is, if people are watching at home, so we don't have quorum, this is an information only meeting, no decisions will be made today. But since you've all been able to come, we allow you to share this very fun spreadsheet with you that the team has been able to put together. I believe the purpose of which was to get a better sense about costs of recreation services in the community and different locations. And when we're talking about the cost of recreation in a municipal government, we recognize that it's never, in no municipal government does recreation cost recover. However, the goal is to get a minimum of 30% cost recovery across your recreation. We recently heard, I guess last fall, November last year, that Kamloops, in fact, is trying to recover 50% of their operating costs. So when we look at this spreadsheet, you'll see that we haven't included in the total expenses, the capital costs as a roll up in those total expenses. But we have looked at park facilities, so that would be the washrooms, the I'm having a mental break. What would we have included in that? The washrooms? No, park facilities. Mike, Dave.
I'm sorry, going through the chair. So janitorial costs, toilet paper, all the condiments, as well as plumbing costs and contractors, concession cleaning, vent cleaning, electrical contractors, are security services monitoring system. There's a cost to that as well, for added cost in facilities.
Great, thank you. And so you can see what we've done is we've put park facilities as one section and then the remaining parks and landscaping as a second section. So the total expenses for park facilities is $68,848 whereas the revenue for park facilities is $9,161. For the remaining parks and landscaping work that the city staff does, it's $363,233. And again, that's operational. It's not involved capital expenses. So if a fence needs to be replaced, that would be a capital expense. If a dugout needs to be replaced, that could potentially be a capital expense. You know, if a roof needed to be repaired or replaced, that could be a capital expense. So when we look at the total costs of parks and landscaping, we have $432,081 total cost for operations. And again, the total revenue is $9,161. Second section, the second facility is the arena. We have total revenue of $148,832 and operating cost of $687,346. So that represents about 18.3% of cost recovery. And I'll go back to the parks and landscaping. That represented the revenue generated represented 1.9% of cost recovery. The aquatic center We actually get quite a bit of recovery, revenue from, however, it's quite expensive to operate. So $367,053 in revenue. However, part of that is the TNRD grant. So it's not actually user fees. So if that TNRD grant was no longer available to us, although we're hoping to make it better. So our total expenses is $1,141,461, which is a 16.7% cost recovery. Civic Center actually does the best. In 2023, we had $113,683 in revenue and $387,792, which is 27.3%. And then programming, we had $126,442 in revenue and $337,345 in expenses, which represented 14% of cost recovery. So as you can see, we're not anywhere near getting to that, minimum golden ticket of 30% cost recovery on recreation. It's very challenging to get to that. However, what that means is that if our total, you can see our total percentage of cost recovery is 16%, that means that our tax levy has to cover the remaining cost of the recreation or operation expenses. Further, it's really important to remember these are just operating expenses. If we're going to, again, do a major retrofit of a building, and both the arena and the aquatic center require major work right now. Civic Center is also very close to needing a major retrofit. Those capital costs could be in the millions of dollars that we have to come up with. And what happens with grants, we always apply for many grants. Typically for a provincial or federal grant, we have to match 50% of the grant amount. So if our retrofit is $900,000, the maximum we're going to get from the federal government or the provincial government is 4.5. So that means we have to come up with that remaining amount. And I can tell you that currently we do not have any money available in our reserve fund to do this kind of work. So we're putting some effort into getting some smaller grants to do some assessments that will allow us to access bigger grants in the future for the aquatic center, the arena, and I believe the civic center. Is that correct, Dave? Yeah. So, before we can even do that work, we're having to do a lot of pre-work to be able to be eligible for those grants. So I think that should summarize kind of what you were hoping to see in regards to the cost of services and the operating costs versus the revenue.
Yes, it definitely helps. I think it's tough that in my mind, if we want to get to 30%, then let's just charge 30%, right? Like if the field users, if we want Central Park to get 30% of its expenses, but we don't have that, right? We don't know what Central Park costs or Rotary Park costs, right? So it's correct. That's correct. Yeah.
So we have to be careful with that because that's kind of what we tried to do last year.
Yeah.
And then we had an uprising. So that's why this committee was formed, is to, sure, it would be easy to go 30%, but that's a lot of money. And that's going to put a lot of people out of range to do some of the things, right? And the goal, and I think Cynthia and everybody can back me up on this, is that youth doesn't have to have a cost barrier in order to enjoy some of these things. That's what we would like to get to. Adults pay, youth don't, sort of thing. I think 30% it would be awesome to get to, but I think you're going to have to climb that mountain over a certain period of years. You can't just do it in 1 year. It would basically, we would end up with exactly what we ended up with last year. That's it. I'm going to Kamloops. I'm going to go somewhere else. So, I think we have to, slay what we can and move responsible with what we cannot. And that's why I think once we start talking about this, as we get closer to budget, this committee can run some numbers. Kevin will run some numbers by. We can see what works, what looks right, what people can afford. And I think we need to make that decision from there. I'm glad that we're seeing this because it's an eye opener when you see it.
So based on sort of the amount of infrastructure that is in Central Park versus the amount of infrastructure that's in, say, Rotary Park. You know, and the difference between a sports field and a playground, like a playground structure. Obviously, we're not going to cost recover on a playground structure. We're not going to cost recover on the water park, like the spray pad, right? Those are things you don't charge for. We do try and cost recover on rentals of those parks. Like if somebody was having a wedding and they wanted to rent the park, we could cost recover on that. But ultimately, the majority of the minimum, we're going to say a minimum of half the cost goes to Central Park because it has the most facilities in it. So if you take out like, you know, 68, almost $70,000, which is specific to bathrooms, band shells, and that sort of thing, then that leaves the vast majority of it to grass cutting, sports fields. Because flowers are a different budget, which we cut down to only $30,000 last year, from I think it was 8,000. So if we say that minimum half of this large number of $363,000 is maintaining grass, maintaining field conditions, irrigation, that sort of stuff, you know, we're still not at $9,161. We're still pretty small. That's still a pretty small amount of revenue. And ultimately, in order to make things as inclusive as possible for youth, there are only two ways to do that. There are taxation, which to close this funding gap, Kevin, we're looking at about a 2 to 3% tax increase. Like if we just looked at parks and landscaping, the total of parks, facilities, parks and landscaping. 4%. Sorry, Kevin, your mic. Yes.
Total parks and landscaping, you'd be looking at 4% taxation.
Yeah, to cover, to get like, so we're looking at a minimum of 2% to get at a 50%. So you're looking again, like if you think scaling that down a little bit, if we want to get to 30, although Kevin would like us to get to 50, because it makes our lives easier. You're looking at well over a 1% tax increase for every resident in the community. Or if you increase user fees. So if you want youth to be very inexpensive, then that only leaves adult user fees that we can play with. So, you know, if you're thinking about, you know, how to balance those things, which is why, like for the arena is an easy one, adults pay for an hour of ice, adult users pay $145 and youth pay $75. So we're almost at trying to keep it at half, right? Which is generally how we do these things, is try and keep youth at half of what adults pay, minimum.
Thanks, Chair. To the CFO, what is a 1% increase in dollars, CFO?
113,270.
Just so I wanted you to know what that was. Yeah. 1%. So if we go up 1%, that's what 1% is, 113,000.
Nobody's got it now.
So ultimately what that means is that in order to close the gap of however much, let's say we have a $500,000 funding gap in any of our services, in order to close that gap, every 1% that we increase your residential property tax or your business property tax or whatever, property tax, every 1% we increase is $113,000. So to get $500,000 closed, you're looking at a 4 and a bit % increase in property taxes. Overall, for everybody. I mean, it's not like you're paying that much more, but yeah. Yeah,
So for the amount for everybody in the community, just that amount for the whole year.
yeah. So when
It's pretty small when you divide that by everybody.
it does become relatively small when you divide it by everybody, but what happens is we're talking about, you know, at this point, and this is, you know, we're going into our budget process right now, but last year we had a 12%, 12.5% tax increase because we simply don't have enough money in reserves to do the work that needs to get done. And I always go back to the wastewater treatment plant, you know, 5 years ago, that was a $30 to $40 million project. In today's dollars, Amy, what do you like? You're in the construction field there.
I couldn't even guess.
Yeah,
A
so
lot.
probably double,
Yeah.
you know, at least 1.5 times. So if we're looking at $60 million to do our wastewater treatment plant, let's say we can get half of that in grants from the government, we still need $30-ish thousand. We don't have, sorry, $30 million. That's a big number. It frightens me. $30 million. We don't have that in the bank. We can't do it. Right? So that's why, unfortunately, we're in a position because rates and fees went stagnant for more than a decade for some of our departments that we're so far behind. We were just doing the math on water and sewer. For us to generally for water and sewer, you want to be operating at cost recovery. We can't make money on water and sewer, but we want to be operating on cost recovery. And we're about $600,000 to $700,000 short on what we charge people as a community to be at cost recovery, which means that when we don't do that, we either have to tax more or we have to take it out of our bank account, out of our savings account, and put it into our operational account, which means we have less money to do the things that need to get done. So, you know,
And you have no extra when you have something break down.
exactly. So it becomes tougher to deal with emergencies. So, you know, and the ways in recreation that one generally deals with this is sponsorships like on the diamonds or community fundraisers and that sort of thing. And those are great. But what happens then is that a facility gets built and, you know, the difference between a facility without water and sewer with just maybe electrical, Dave, versus the facility with water and sewer, those then become part of our operational costs. So when a facility gets donated to us, it sounds great because we don't have to pay for it. But for the next 50 years, we have to operate it. So we have to pay for it.
And then upgrades in the future.
And upgrades in the future and things like that. So, you know, I know that Amy, the bulk people have been talking about storage and maybe doing something there, which is fantastic. But we can't let it get too big because then it becomes a huge financial burden going forward. So it is a complex thing to figure out how to make things accessible. And again, I come from a recreation background. I have an undergrad in kinesiology. I have like a ridiculous number of coaching certifications and have spent a lot of time coaching in my lifetime. So I 100% support youth sports being as accessible as possible. But it's really hard to figure out how to manage that in a way that doesn't burden everybody. I've had people come to me and say, I don't know why I have to pay school taxes. I don't have kids in school. Because that's part of civil society. You pay school taxes so we have good schools. Right. So there's always a pushback from some portion of the community who's like, I don't want to pay for people's recreation. I don't want to pay for other kids to go to school. I don't want to pay for, right? Even though we see the benefits of things like free recreation for kids. That's not always the whole community's perspective. Just to, you know, pontificate on that.
So just to point out the 5% we're talking about, also, we have to take into consideration the rest of the community. There's going to be capital, there's fire, there's so that 5% has to be tacked on to the rest of it, and then we get up to 12%. But then we also have to look at a situation such as Aspen Planers that is now having problems. We could lose a very large part of our tax intake. So that's another thing we have to constantly play with is we're always on the verge of losing some tax intake as well. And the 5% sounds small, but that's just for one department. We also have several other that we have to talk about. And so that, you know, if you talk 5%, even at 12.5, that's almost half the budget just for recreation.
Mhm.
That can't happen because somebody also have to get shorted out. So
Yeah.
it's not an easy situation. I mean, I know last year, Osoyoos, because of the problems that they're having, they went a 40% increase and it was a problem. But they had no choices. They were out of money and they had to fix things. So that is the balancing game that gets played, is to try to get a little bit of money everywhere. And sometimes you say, 5% doesn't sound like much, but that's why I wanted the 113,000 attached to it. So you know exactly what 1% was.
Mhm.
Now, when I started in council in 2008, 1% was 38,500. So that's how, you know, that's how much it's come in just a few short years. So.
COVID hasn't helped. And so I think, you know, ultimately, I think the role that this committee needs to play is to reach out to their user group and say, what do you think you could afford? Right? If we had to go, you know, if we went from $100 a year registration or season registration to $125 registration in order to pay some fees, how does that impact our usership? Right? Like it's always a balance, right? Like, you know, we had places again that haven't been touched since 2007, 2004. I think the Civic Center, some of it was from 2004. There had been no changes. We went up quite a bit. We've had people choose not to use the facility. And there's two parts to that. Great. They're out there using private or other public facilities and injecting other monies into other parts of the community. Whereas we don't want to compete with private business. If somebody rents a room somewhere in a private business to run an event, that's actually great. We don't want to compete with that as a municipal government. We prefer private business be thriving, right? So it's always a balancing point of when do we pay, when do we charge, when does it become that tipping point where we charge too much versus we're not charging at all, or charging way too little. So that's kind of what I think needs to be potentially the next step for the user groups, is to say, what could we afford? Right? What could people bring in? How often are people using Kids Sport or Jumpstart? Is it too much? Is it not enough? Do we have more kids that could benefit from it who aren't accessing it? I don't know.
Well, I know with like, I looked into the original Jumpstart, just wanted to see what it was, the curriculum was, and I am at like I'm not below, like on the low income, but one up from that, I still don't qualify. I make too much, even though I have 3 kids that need to go into sports and it costs a lot. I still don't qualify. It's only for low income, which it would be nice if they had at least a little bit of help for just the next back it up, because we don't make that, we don't make enough to live. That's it, right? So yeah, there's certain things.
That's a great point. You know, depending what your kids are doing, like my boy's at hockey practice, or he was, hopefully he's almost home now, but I have 3 kids. I don't think all 3 of them can play hockey. Right? I have a kid that figure skates. If she decided to be competitive, I would be paying almost $1,000 for skates that she's going to grow in 2 years. The cost of everything has gone up, but the support hasn't necessarily gone up with it. Right?
We've had to tell our kids, you're not allowed to play hockey. I'm sorry. We can't afford it as a family, even if you wanted to. I'm sorry. Just not feasible. We just couldn't do it.
The other thing too that this group has to think about, we're now seeking out a new tennis court as well. Now, talking with Rick, we're looking at about a $500,000 cost for that. We're also looking at expanding the pickleball and repairing the pickleball that's already damaged. Not sure what the number on that would be. So these are the things that come in as well. Sure, we've got baseball and lacrosse and soccer, but we do have other groups in town that need to be supported as well. So there, again, it's a fine balancing game, and that's why I'm very happy that this group is here and that this group is willing to work through that and, you know, kind of swing that axe, try and see how we can make this work. But yeah, it's a little bit of work, but I think we'll get there.
I'm curious, just from like a council perspective, how do you prioritize user groups? Like who says that we should be paying $500,000 for tennis courts?
Well, that's, so basically, that's just what the going rate for a tennis court is. One of the reasons that we're moving on the tennis court, we're not moving any quicker than we would for anyone else, but the one that they're on is slowly deteriorating. They've gone from 4 courts down to 2. 2 are so dangerous they can't use them anymore. So we know it's only a limited amount of time before those courts are done. And with the pickleball, with the heaving and stuff, we've got to be careful there that we've got seniors playing there. We don't want them to start stubbing, going down and breaking a hip or breaking up their, smashing their faces. So again, I don't think any user groups gets prioritized other than the fact that certain things start to break down and you've got to take care of it before you start having liability issues. Now, Dave, if you want to jump in on that, I'm not sure if there is a priority for groups or not, but the way, just from what I've been involved with in the community, it's what comes up, and a lot of time it's what grant shows up. So
Through to Madam Chair, absolutely right. No priorities, prioritization in groups. Every group's very important. We all love them all. Facility wise, our facilities are aging. Like I say, we need to start planning on putting money together, getting ready to upgrade them for the user groups that are using them. That cost always comes with that. I think the biggest issue that we are talking about is just the rates themselves, where we need to really look at them and look at adjustment, something that we can live with, something that we can evolve and get better, at least taking a few steps forward. Maybe we stumble on our way there, but at least we're doing the right thing for the community and for our, our youth and our users.
It's Brandy. Oh, maybe not. Sorry. See.
Oh, it's me.
Yeah.
I forgot that it goes in order. And I think, there's no official priority, but I think when you think about when we come to council with capital projects, things that we've identified that need to be upgraded or would be of benefit to the community, as a leadership team, we take input from our supervisors and managers and we say, okay, these are all the things that could happen. These are the must-dos for safety, right? Again, no water, no sewer, no town. These are the must-dos for safety. These are we really should do before the next 2 or 3 years are done. And these are the really nice to haves. And then we take that to council and we tell them why we've prioritized things that way. And ultimately, any decision about facilities, for instance, or if there's going to be a $500,000 tennis court, is ultimately council's decision based on the council of the day, right? Whatever their priorities are. So, again, if you're going to say a $500,000 tennis court, or, we have a street that's had 10 water main breaks in the last 3 years, and we need to dig that up. Otherwise, we're going to be in some serious problems, and that's going to be a $1 million project, right? Maybe that tennis court is no longer the priority. Maybe the water main break street is. But those are the decisions, the hard decisions that council has to make as they're moving forward. So we really only prioritize on you got to do this. It's legislated. If we don't do it, something bad is going to happen kind of priorities. And then this is about to fall apart and this would be really nice to have.
It's Brandy.
I was just wondering, this rates creation for ballparks, is that an idea of how you can increase kind of slowly to get to the number you want, or? Because
Okay.
Been hitting around the numbers since day one, since we brought the rates in January. A big thing in the conversation I had with Madam Chair, where did we get this rate from? Where did we create it from? So what I did is I created a rate out of the rates we used to have. So it's an actual City of Merritt rate that we used to have. I've talked with the CFO and we came up with an approximate 40% increase if we would have been increasing since the day we should have. Once the rates were accepted, we would be about a 40% increase. So then I've just done the calculations and just kind of wanted to show what I personally think the rate should be at for adult ball. And then I also created a rate for youth just adding at 25%. So if you were to pay 25% of what an adult pays, this is what it would look like. I've also attached an email I got from my manager. She reached out to Summerland and to Kamloops, which also shows some rates of ball fields. Summerlands doesn't charge their youth anything at all for local youth, but then they charge non-local youth $5.31 an hour. Adult ball, they charge where is it for their locals at $13.27 per hour. If you look on the other side, you'll have Kamloops, where Kamloops has rates for soccer, for baseball, for youth and hockey, and for adults, and they're all well above what we have. So I just wanted to have some numbers there to start the communications.
Yeah, are we talking about these rates? I think they look great. I think I'd have to do a little bit of math to know exactly how much it's gonna cost, but
Just remember, we can't vote on anything
No.
tonight, so. I would suggest, since we're at a kind of a lame duck meeting, we take that for information for the next meeting and go over it.
Sure.
So Josh and Lisa can have a little bit of time to look at it as well. And the rates sit well, then it'd be a good idea. If they need to be tweaked, we could probably do that for next meeting. I mean, that's, I just need some time to look at it. I just got back, so I haven't seen this for very long, so.
Yeah, and I think, when we're talking about these rates, that, remember, we'll be looking for some sort of annual increase as well. And again, if you wanted to weight the adults more, knowing that we also can't afford our capital, that's something you should also be thinking about, right? Like, you may want to put more burden on adults than we're putting on kids, which is why the 25%, but at the same time, if you look at the hourly rate for a ball diamond in, where was it? Hourly rate for a ball diamond in Kamloops. Oh, I'm on the wrong day. Yeah, it's 25.
13.40 in 2023.
No, sorry, the adult hourly rate is 25, is going to be 26.79 in 2025. I think we have 16 here. Maybe they could pay a bit more. 22.40, I guess, is what they've got, but maybe they could pay a bit more.
I will mention just I work really closely with the Kamloops Minor Ball League, and their fees have to be so high that their league's just about dead now. They've got like 2 teams because of this. I don't know necessarily because of this, but I do know that their fees have to be very high.
Yeah.
And the softball's pretty much died there because of that.
It's a balancing act, right? And when you live in a community that actually has a fair amount of recreation per capita for the size of this community, 7,500 people, there are a number of physical recreation things we can do, right? You've got gymnastics, you've got hockey, you've got figure skating, you've got soccer, you've got ball, you've got curling, and then school sports and volleyball, there's a lot of stuff that people can do here. So when you're competing for kids, yeah, they're going to probably go to a less expensive sport, which ultimately is soccer and ball compared to hockey. But those are different seasons. And, it is always a balancing act about how to maintain a healthy organization, but also be able to pay for the stuff you're using.
Everybody done? Are we done talking? Lights generally pop up if we wait long enough. Perfect. Sounds like a good plan. We will do that. We'll pass this on to the people that are not here and bring it up to the next meeting, which we should set now. That's something we should do. Oh. Let's see.
So Madam Chair, if you would permit, we'll get this sent out, but I'll also just add a little note. Talk to the user groups, talk to your users about what would be too much, what would be, what's the tipping point? Help us find that tipping point so that we can come back with a reasonable number.
I'm also kind of tying into like old news. I don't know, we talked about the pickleball lease and the tennis court. Is that still kind of tied into this? Are we talking about rates for them too, or?
So I can tell you that some actions around leases are happening to try and see if we can, those places where leases are really, 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 really low, really low. And some user groups are very low as well, like not field user groups, but other user groups are super low. So we're really working to go back and identify those and come to something that's a little bit more of a modern lease and a modern use of public space.
So setting the next meeting? Okay. Oh,
Sorry, I believe if I remember correctly, you were wanting to meet once a month. I believe so. Our next meeting would be in November. And the third Thursday is kind of what we have been landing on. Is that still working, or is there another day that works better? Recognizing that we only have 3 out of the 6 members here.
Actually, I'm gonna ask, can we go earlier in November? Because can we go in a couple of weeks? Because ultimately we need to get this budget or this bylaw written. So every year we bring a rates and fees bylaw to council. Well, starting last year, this is what we're doing, with sort of that 3-year projection of where rates will be. So if we want to get these rates to start January 1st and align with our work on our budget projections, then I think we need to get these numbers pinned down so that we can get this bylaw written and before council before December. Does that sound correct, CFO? Thank you.
So in that case, would November 7th work?
7th works for me.
We can also move this to another night of the week if that works better for the committee. Okay. Then we'll
Same thing.
Okay, then we can tentatively book it for the 7th if that works for the committee, and then we'll send out the meeting invitation and we'll just make sure that it's noted in there just to save the date, and we'll confirm.
Sounds good to me.
Yes.
No, that's good. Yeah. So just in regards to the rates bylaw that we're hoping to kind of have together, is that in all rates? Like, are we talking about the hockey rink? Like, we should try to reach out to all user groups? Just our own. Okay. Okay. And do I terminate? Okay, terminate at 6:37.